"Dad, we're transferring your pension to my account. You just need a roof until the end." Nicholas said this, looking directly into my eyes. I didn't answer anything. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence, each syllable cutting deeper than I thought possible. 29 years old, my son stood there in my living room wearing a $500 jacket I'd helped pay for, delivering news that would destroy everything I'd worked for. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I sat frozen in my recliner, the same chair where I'd rocked him to sleep as a baby, where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd listened to his dreams about becoming successful. Now he was using that success to strip away my dignity, my security, my future. Just need a roof until the end. The phrase echoed in my mind, until the end. Like I was already dead, just waiting for my body to catch up with the reality. My pension, $17,000 every month. 43 years of getting up at 5 in the morning, working double shifts, missing family dinners, postponing vacations. All so I could retire with dignity. All so I could take care of myself without being a burden to anyone. And now my own son was telling me I didn't deserve that independence. "The paperwork is already prepared," Nicholas continued, his voice as cold as winter concrete. "My attorney says it's the most efficient way to handle your finances going forward. You won't have to worry about managing money anymore. Won't have to worry. Like managing my own finances was some impossible burden instead of a basic human right. Like I was already too senile to understand what $17,000 a month meant to a man who'd spent his entire life earning every penny through honest work. I watched his face as he spoke. This wasn't the boy I'd raised. This wasn't the child I'd stayed up with during fevers, taught to ride a bicycle, walked to his first day of school. This was a stranger wearing my son's features, speaking with my son's voice, but with eyes that held no warmth, no love, no recognition of everything I'd sacrificed for him. "Dad, are you listening?" Nicholas snapped his fingers in front of my face like I was a confused old man in a nursing home. "We need to get this handled this week. My financial advisor says waiting just complicates things." His financial advisor. When had my son's life become so important that he needed a financial advisor? When had my retirement become so insignificant that it was just a complication to be handled? I remembered the day he graduated college. I'd been so proud, sitting in that auditorium watching him walk across the stage. The degree I'd helped pay for, the future I'd helped make possible. He'd hugged me that day, told me I was the best father anyone could ask for. Said he'd take care of me when I got old, make sure I never had to worry about anything. Now I was 55 years old, not ancient, not incapacitated, not confused, just a man who'd worked hard his entire life and expected to enjoy the fruits of that labor. But apparently that expectation was unreasonable. "The house is too big for you anyway," Nicholas continued, walking around my living room like he was already appraising it. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. What do you need all this space for? We can find you a nice little apartment. Maybe one of those senior communities where you can play cards with people your own age. Senior communities. At 55. Where I could play cards with people my own age while my son lived in my house, spent my money, enjoyed the life I'd built through decades of sacrifice. I thought about my workshop in the garage, filled with tools I'd collected over the years. Projects half finished. Furniture I was building for the grandchildren I might never have. Would that workshop become Nicholas's storage space? Would my tools be sold at a garage sale, labeled as old man's junk by someone who'd never understood the satisfaction of building something with your own hands? "Mom would have wanted this," Nicholas said, and that's when something inside me finally cracked. His mother. My wife Sarah had died 3 years ago, cancer taking her piece by piece while I held her hand and promised I'd be strong. She'd made me promise to take care of myself, to enjoy my retirement, to not let anyone take advantage of my generous nature. "Your mother," I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time since he'd started talking, "wanted me to be happy. She wanted me to travel, to fix up the house, to live comfortably on the pension I earned." Nicholas waved his hand dismissively. "Dad, you're being emotional. This is a practical decision. I can manage your money better than you can. I have experience with investments, with financial planning. You just worked at a power plant your whole life. Just worked at a power plant. Like keeping the lights on for thousands of families was somehow less important than whatever Nicholas did in his office downtown. Like 43 years of reliable service, of never missing a day, of working overtime whenever needed. was somehow inferior to his college degree and his expensive suits. I looked at him standing there, checking his phone while he dismantled my life, and I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I hadn't raised a son. I'd raised a predator, someone who saw weakness and moved to exploit it. Someone who looked at his aging father and saw opportunity instead of the man who'd given him everything. "You know what the worst part is, Nicholas?" I asked, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. He looked up from his phone, annoyed at the interruption. "What? The worst part is that I taught you this. I taught you that taking care of family means sacrificing everything for them. I taught you that love means giving until it hurts. And you learned the lesson perfectly. You just learned to be the one who takes instead of the one who gives." Something flickered across his face. For just a moment, I thought I saw the boy I'd raised, the child who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by the cold efficiency of a man who decided his father was just another problem to be solved. "Dad, you're being dramatic. This is just financial planning. Smart financial planning." Smart financial planning. That's what he called stealing my future. That's what he called reducing me to someone who just needs a roof until the end. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking from years of hard work, and walked to the window. Outside, spring was trying to break through winter's grip. Daffodils were pushing up through the mulch Sarah had planted the year before she died. Life insisting on continuing even when everything seemed hopeless. "Get out of my house, Nicholas." The words came out quietly, but they carried the weight of 55 years of living, of learning when to fight and when to surrender. This was a fight. "Dad, don't be ridiculous. We need to finish this conversation." I turned to face him, and something in my expression must have warned him that the old man he thought he could manipulate had just remembered how to bite back. "Get out of my house. Now." Nicholas stared at me for a long moment, probably calculating whether tears or anger would be more effective. Finally, he shrugged and headed toward the door. "Fine, but this conversation isn't over. The paperwork needs to be signed by Friday, or my attorney will have to pursue other options." Other options. Threats now, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who'd forgotten that the man he was threatening had once been the center of his world. The door slammed behind him, and I was alone with the silence and the dying light of a day that had started normal and ended with my son revealing himself as my enemy. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Sarah, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the boy who used to have nightmares, who would creep down the hall and whisper, "Daddy, I'm scared," until I let him crawl under the covers between his mother and me. When had fear turned him into something that scared others? Around midnight, I heard Nicholas's car in the driveway. He still had a key, still thought of this as his home whenever he needed something. I heard the front door open quietly, heard his footsteps trying to be stealthy as he moved through the house. He was going to the kitchen. I knew because that's where I kept the important papers, where Sarah used to pay bills and organize our financial documents. He was probably looking for bank statements, pension documents, anything that would help him complete his takeover of my life. I lay still and listened to him moving around downstairs, opening drawers, rustling through papers. My own son, creeping through my house like a thief in the night, stealing more than money, stealing trust, stealing love, stealing the last illusions I had about the man he'd become. When I heard him open the kitchen drawer where I kept the household tools, I held my breath and waited for what I knew was coming next. The scream that came from the kitchen wasn't human. It was the sound of a man's world collapsing in real time, a howl of shock and betrayal that cut through the midnight silence like breaking glass. "Help! Dad! Help me!" I threw off the covers and ran downstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. The kitchen light was blazing, and Nicholas stood frozen by the open utensil drawer, his face white as paper, his hands shaking as he held a stack of legal documents. "What is it? What's wrong?" I asked, though I already knew. The performance was beginning. "Dad," his voice cracked like a teenager's, "what are these? What are all these papers?" He held up the documents with trembling fingers. Real estate contracts, sale agreements, transfer papers, all bearing my signature, all dated within the last 6 months, all completely legitimate and legally binding. "Those," I said calmly, "are the contracts for the sale of this house." The color drained completely from his face. "Sale? What sale? You never said anything about selling the house." I walked past him to pour myself a glass of water, taking my time, letting the reality sink in. The kitchen where Sarah had cooked thousands of meals, where we'd celebrated birthdays and worried over bills, where our son had eaten breakfast before school every morning for 18 years, the kitchen he'd planned to inherit along with everything else. I sold it 3 months ago, I said, setting the glass down with deliberate care. Closed last Tuesday, $2.2 million, cash sale. Nicholas stared at me like I'd just announced I was an alien. 2.2 million. But this is our house. This is the family home. You can't just sell it without telling me. Our house, family home. Funny how quickly his language had changed from too big for you to family home once he realized it was gone. Actually, Nicholas, I can sell it. It's my house. My name on the deed, my mortgage payments for 30 years, my decision. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out leftover pizza from dinner. Want some? It's pepperoni. Dad! His voice climbed to near hysteria. This isn't a joke. Where are we supposed to live? What about my room? What about all our stuff? Your room? I took a bite of cold pizza and chewed slowly. Son, you moved out 7 years ago. You have your own apartment downtown, remember? The one with the expensive rent I help you pay? He was rifling through the documents now, his expensive manicured fingers leaving sweat stains on the papers. Sale contract, closing documents, wire transfer confirmations. All there in black and white, all completely legal. But where's the money? He whispered. $2.2 million, where did it go? I reached into the drawer and pulled out another set of papers. Bank statements from 3 different offshore accounts, all showing substantial deposits, all bearing my name as the sole account holder. Cayman Islands, I said conversationally. Amazing how easy it is to move money these days. Electronic transfers, completely untraceable once it hits international waters. Nicholas's legs gave out. He collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs, the documents scattered across the table like evidence of a crime. Which, from his perspective, I suppose they were. You moved our money offshore? His voice was barely audible. All of it? My money, Nicholas. My pension, my house sale proceeds, my savings account, everything that belonged to me. I sat down across from him, watching his world crumble with the same cold efficiency he'd used to plan mine. Amazing how much a man can accumulate in 43 years of honest work. But the pension transfer, he stammered. The paperwork I showed you. My attorney said it was all legal. I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. When had I learned to laugh like that? Cold and sharp, like glass breaking. Your attorney was right. It would have been completely legal. If I still had a pension to transfer. What do you mean? I reached for another document from the drawer. This one was official letterhead from the power company, signed and notarized. Medical retirement application, filed and approved last month, citing severe depression and anxiety following my wife's death, inability to make sound financial decisions, recommendation for immediate psychiatric evaluation. Nicholas read the document 3 times before the words penetrated. You declared yourself mentally incompetent, temporarily incapacitated due to grief-related mental health issues, I corrected. Amazing what a good psychiatrist will sign off on when you explain how your family is concerned about your financial vulnerability. Dr. Martinez was very understanding, said it was common for widowers to become targets for financial abuse. But you're not... Nicholas's voice trailed off as the full scope of what I'd done became clear. You planned this. You planned all of this. I finished my pizza and wiped my hands on a napkin. Remember last Christmas, Nicholas, when you brought your girlfriend over for dinner? You thought I was napping on the couch, but I heard your conversation in the kitchen. His face went gray. What conversation? The one where you told her that the old man wouldn't last much longer, and when he died you'd inherit everything. The house, the pension, all of it. You said I was getting too old to manage my own finances anyway, and it would be better for everyone if you took control sooner rather than later. Nicholas opened and closed his mouth like a fish, gasping for air. Dad, that's not... You were just planning my financial execution, I said gently. Which is fine, son. Really, it taught me something important about the difference between family and blood relatives. I stood up and started loading the dishwasher, the domestic routine strangely comforting in the middle of destroying my son's future. The pension cancellation was actually easy. Turns out the power company has very specific policies about protecting mentally compromised retirees from family members who might take advantage of them. This is insane. Nicholas was on his feet now, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. You can't just disappear $2.2 million and cancel your pension. There are laws, there are procedures. You're absolutely right, I agreed, and I followed every single one of them. The sale of the house was handled by Morrison and Associates, the same real estate firm that sold the Hendersons their place last year. The offshore accounts were established through Sterling Financial, completely legitimate international banking services. The pension cancellation went through proper medical and legal channels. I closed the dishwasher and turned to face him. I spent 6 months making sure everything was legal, Nicholas. 6 months of careful planning while you were making your own plans for my money. But why? The question came out as a broken whisper. Why would you do this to me? I'm your son. I studied his face, looking for any trace of the child I'd loved, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for. All I saw was a stranger who'd worn my son's face while planning to strip away my dignity and independence. You know what's funny, Nicholas? You keep saying, why would you do this to me? Like you're the victim here. Like I'm the one who came into your house and announced I was taking everything you'd worked for. That's different. You're old. You don't need all that money. I'm 55 years old, son. I could live another 30 years. But even if I only had 30 days left, those would be my 30 days to live with dignity, instead of your 30 days to manage my decline. Nicholas slumped back into the chair, the fight going out of him as the reality settled in. No house to inherit, no pension to transfer, no vulnerable old man to manipulate, just a son who'd revealed his true character and a father who'd responded accordingly. What happens now? He asked quietly. I looked around the kitchen one more time, memorizing details I'd never see again. Sarah's coffee mug still in the dish drainer, the scratches on the table from 20 years of homework sessions, the growth chart penciled on the doorframe marking Nicholas's height from age 5 to 18. Now you learn what I learned 43 years ago, I said. You figure out how to take care of yourself without anyone else's money. But Dad, I have bills. I have rent. I have car payments. I can't just start over from nothing. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the daffodils Sarah had planted, stronger now in the morning light. Spring always came, even after the harshest winters. Nicholas, I said without turning around, yesterday you told me I just needed a roof until the end. Today you're discovering what it feels like when someone decides the same thing about you. The silence stretched between us until I heard his chair scrape against the floor. He gathered up the scattered documents, his movements slow and defeated. This isn't over, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. I'll hire lawyers. I'll contest the mental health ruling. I'll prove you planned all this. You're welcome to try, I said, but you should know that Dr. Martinez's evaluation included detailed notes about family members who might attempt to pressure a vulnerable patient into reversing necessary financial protections. Nicholas stopped at the kitchen doorway, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his new reality. I never thought you were smart enough to do something like this, he said. I turned to face him one last time. I never thought I raised a son who would try to steal my future. I guess we both learned something new about each other. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen and waited for the moving truck that would arrive in 3 hours to pack the few belongings I was taking with me. The new house I'd bought in Montana was smaller, simpler, surrounded by mountains and silence instead of memories and betrayal. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten how to feel: peace. 3 days passed before Nicholas called. 3 days of silence that I spent packing my remaining belongings and watching the seasons change through my kitchen window. When the phone finally rang, I almost didn't answer it. Dad, we need to talk. His voice sounded different, smaller somehow, like a child who'd broken something expensive and was hoping to avoid consequences. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can I come over? Please? The word please was new. Nicholas hadn't said please to me in probably 10 years. I almost smiled. The house closes tomorrow, son. After that, you'll need to find me in Montana. Montana? The shock in his voice was genuine. You're moving to Montana. Small town called Cedar Ridge. Population about 3,000. Perfect place for an old man who just needs a roof until the end. The silence stretched long enough that I thought he'd hung up. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled, like he was reading from a script. Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night. Maybe I was too hasty about the pension transfer. Maybe we should discuss other options. Other options. The language of negotiation from someone who'd finally realized he had nothing to negotiate with. I'm afraid that ship has sailed, Nicholas. The pension department was very understanding about my need for immediate protection from financial exploitation. Apparently, it's more common than you'd think. Financial exploitation. His voice cracked on the words. Dad, I wasn't trying to exploit you, I was trying to help. Help. I repeated the word like I was tasting something bitter. Is that what you call it when you tell your girlfriend that your old man won't last much longer, and you're just waiting for your inheritance? The sharp intake of breath told me he remembered the conversation I'd overheard, the one where he'd laughed about how easy it would be to convince me to sign over control of my finances. You weren't supposed to hear that. No, I wasn't. Lucky for me, I did. I heard him moving around, probably pacing his expensive apartment, the one I'd helped him secure with a down payment that represented 6 months of my pension, money I'd never see again, invested in a life that had been planning my destruction. Dad, listen to me. I made a mistake. I was angry about Mom dying, angry about everything changing, and I said things I didn't mean, but we can fix this, we can work something out. Work something out. The desperate language of someone who'd just realized they'd been outmaneuvered by a man they'd underestimated. Nicholas, do you know how I found out about your real plans? What do you mean? I walked to the living room window and looked out at the neighborhood I'd called home for 25 years. Mrs. Patterson was walking her dog past the house where the Johnsons used to live before their son convinced them to move into assisted living. Different families, same story. I hired a private investigator. The silence on the other end was deafening. 6 months ago, when you started making comments about how I was getting too old to live alone, how I needed help with my finances, how it would be better if someone younger managed my affairs, those comments made me curious about what you really thought of your aging father. Dad, you hired someone to spy on me. I hired someone to protect me. Turns out that was smart thinking. I pulled out the folder I'd been carrying around for weeks. Photographs, financial records, phone transcripts, the complete picture of my son's life that I'd never seen before. Did you know, Nicholas, that you owe $47,000 in credit card debt? Or that your car payment is $850 a month for a vehicle that's already underwater on the loan? Did you know that you've been telling people at work that your father is developing dementia and you're worried about his ability to make sound financial decisions, laying the groundwork for what you had planned? Each revelation hit him like a physical blow. I could hear his breathing becoming ragged as he realized how thoroughly I understood his situation. The investigator was very thorough, I continued. Financial records, social media posts, conversations with friends, even that meeting you had with the elder law attorney about gaining financial guardianship over a parent who was showing signs of cognitive decline. Dad, please let me explain. Explain what? Explain how you were going to have me declared incompetent so you could access my pension? Explain how you planned to sell my house and put me in the cheapest care facility you could find? Explain how you were going to use my money to pay off your debts and finance the lifestyle you can't actually afford. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Nicholas finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I was in trouble. I'm in trouble. The credit cards, the car loan, everything just got out of hand. I thought if I could manage your money better, we could both benefit. You thought you could steal from me to pay for your mistakes. It wasn't stealing. You're my father. Family helps family. I laughed, and the sound echoed through my empty house. Family helps family. That's what I told myself for 30 years, Nicholas. Every time you needed money for college, for your first apartment, for your car, for your engagement ring that lasted 6 months. Family helps family. Dad, but help goes both ways, son. And when your family member starts secretly planning to take everything you own, that's not family anymore. That's predation. I could hear him crying now, soft sounds of a man whose carefully constructed plan had collapsed around him. Part of me, the part that remembered rocking him to sleep and teaching him to throw a baseball, wanted to comfort him. But that part had died the night I heard him planning my financial execution. What am I supposed to do now? He whispered. What every other 29-year-old adult does, Nicholas. You figure it out. You get a second job, you sell the car you can't afford, you move to a cheaper apartment, you pay off your debts $1 at a time. But I can't do that. I have a reputation to maintain. I have professional obligations. Professional obligations. A reputation to maintain. The entitled language of someone who'd never learned that dignity comes from earning your own way, not from spending someone else's money. Nicholas, do you remember what I was doing when I was 29? Working at the power plant. Working double shifts at the power plant. 16-hour days, 6 days a week because your mother was pregnant and we needed the money for the house. Do you remember me complaining about my reputation or my professional obligations? That was different. Yes, it was. I was working to build something for my family. You were working to tear down what your family had built. The moving truck pulled into my driveway as we talked. 3 men in blue uniforms began unloading boxes and furniture, preparing to transport the remnants of my old life to my new beginning in Montana. Dad, please, I'm begging you, don't do this to me. I'll change. I'll be better. I'll help you manage your finances honestly. We can work together. Work together. I watched the movers carry out the recliner where I'd held him during thunderstorms. Son, you had 43 years to work with me. You chose to work against me instead. But I need help. I can't lose everything. You're not losing everything, Nicholas. You're losing access to money that was never yours to begin with. There's a difference. The movers were loading Sarah's piano now, the instrument she'd played every evening after dinner. Nicholas had always complained about the music, said it was too old-fashioned, too sentimental. Now it was going to a place where someone might appreciate the beauty of simple melodies played with love. Dad, what if I promise to change? What if I get help for my spending problem? What if I prove to you that I can be responsible? Nicholas, do you know what the hardest part of this whole situation has been? What? Realizing that I raised someone who would look at his father's retirement savings and see his own inheritance, someone who would calculate how much longer his father might live and plan accordingly. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Everything we'd been to each other, everything I'd hoped we could become, reduced to a financial transaction. I never thought of it that way. Yes, you did. The investigator recorded you saying exactly that. Another silence. Longer this time. Heavy with the weight of 29 years of relationship crumbling into dust. So, that's it? He asked finally. You're just going to disappear with all the money and leave me to figure everything out alone? I watched the last of my belongings disappear into the moving truck. 40 years of life, reduced to cardboard boxes and plastic wrap. Nicholas, for the past 6 months you've been planning to do exactly that to me. The only difference is that I figured out how to do it first. That's not the same thing. You're right. It's not. When you planned to take my money, you were going to leave me in some cheap facility with just enough resources to survive. When I took my money back, I left you with a college education, job skills, and the ability to build your own life. But I don't know how to do that. Then you'd better learn. Fast. The moving truck driver approached my front door, clipboard in hand. Time to sign the final papers and close this chapter forever. Dad, please don't hang up. Please don't do this. Nicholas, yesterday you thought you were smart enough to manipulate your old man into signing away his future. Today you're learning that intelligence runs both ways in this family. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are, son. You're sorry you got caught. I signed the moving papers and handed the driver his clipboard. In 6 hours, my belongings would begin their journey to Montana. In 8 hours, I'd be on a plane following them. Goodbye, Nicholas. Dad, wait. I hung up the phone and turned it off. Outside, the daffodils Sarah had planted were blooming in earnest now. Bright yellow faces turned toward the spring sun. New life pushing through old soil, just like it was supposed to. The house felt different with all my belongings gone. Smaller somehow, like it had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. I walked through each room one last time, saying goodbye to memories that would have to be enough. In the kitchen, I left an envelope on the counter. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note that said, "Emergency fund only. Use it wisely." Even after everything, I couldn't completely abandon the boy I'd raised, even if that boy had grown into a man I didn't recognize. But $5,000 was all the help he'd get from me. The rest of his life would have to be something he built with his own hands, his own work, his own choices. Just like I had done 43 years ago when I was young and broke and determined to make something of myself. The difference was, I'd had love to motivate me. Nicholas would have to find his own motivation. As I locked the door for the last time, I wondered if he was strong enough to build a life without someone else's money to finance it. I supposed we'd both find out. The flight to Montana gave me 6 hours to think about how I'd arrived at this moment. 6 hours of watching clouds pass beneath me while I replayed 29 years of raising a son who'd grown up to see me as nothing more than a source of funding. The businessman next to me was working on his laptop, probably around Nicholas's age, probably dealing with his own financial pressures. I wondered if he'd ever looked at his aging parents and calculated their net worth. I wondered if this was just how the world worked now, children viewing their parents as retirement accounts with heartbeats. But as the plane began its descent into Billings, I realized my story with Nicholas hadn't started 3 days ago in my kitchen. It had started years earlier, with small moments I'd ignored, warning signs I'd explained away, red flags I'd painted green because I wanted to believe the best about my son. I remembered the first time money became an issue between us. Nicholas was 16, and he'd wanted an expensive pair of sneakers. Not just any sneakers, but a specific brand that cost more than I spent on shoes in 2 years. When I said we couldn't afford them, he'd looked at me with pure contempt. "Mom would have bought them for me," he'd said. Sarah had died just 6 months earlier, and the wound was still raw. The comment hit like a slap, but I'd told myself he was just grieving, just striking out because he missed his mother. So I'd worked overtime for 2 weeks and bought him the sneakers. That should have been the moment I taught him that money doesn't appear by magic, that someone has to work for every dollar, that gratitude matters more than brand names. Instead, I taught him that manipulation worked, that emotional blackmail was an effective strategy, that his father's love could be purchased with guilt. The pattern continued through high school. Designer clothes, expensive electronics, a car for his 17th birthday that cost more than my first house. Every time I hesitated, Nicholas would invoke his dead mother's memory or question my love for him. Every time, I'd find a way to give him what he wanted. College was worse. Not just tuition and room and board, but spending money, fraternity fees, spring break trips, a laptop that cost $3,000 because everyone else has the latest technology, Dad. When I suggested he get a part-time job, he'd acted like I'd asked him to sell his organs. "Dad, college is expensive enough without having to work. You want me to focus on my studies, right? You want me to succeed." Of course I wanted him to succeed. Every parent wants their child to succeed. But I was starting to understand that success bought with someone else's money isn't really success at all. The graduation party was the first time I saw Nicholas clearly. He'd invited dozens of friends to celebrate his degree, and I'd overheard him talking to a group of them about his post-graduation plans. "My dad's got this great pension coming up," he'd said, not knowing I was within earshot. "Plus the house is worth serious money. I'm basically set for life once he retires." Set for life. Not through his own work, his own achievements, his own efforts. Set for life through his father's pension and his anticipated inheritance. I'd walked away from that conversation feeling sick, but I'd told myself he was just young, just talking big to impress his friends. Young people say stupid things. He'd grow out of it. But he hadn't grown out of it. He'd grown into it. The apartment I'd helped him secure after graduation came with a rent payment that consumed 60% of his entry-level salary. When I'd suggested he find something more affordable, he'd looked at me like I'd suggested he live in a cardboard box. "Dad, this apartment is perfect for networking. Location matters in my industry. You can't expect me to build a career from some cheap place in the suburbs." So I'd supplemented his rent for 2 years, telling myself it was an investment in his future. Every month $500 from my pension to ensure my son could maintain the lifestyle he thought he deserved. The car loan was next. 24 months after graduation, Nicholas had decided he needed a vehicle that projected success. The car note was $850 a month, more than many people paid for rent. When the dealer had called about the down payment, I'd found myself writing another check. "It's really an investment, Dad," Nicholas had explained. "Image matters in sales. Clients need to see that you're successful before they'll trust you with their business." I'd believed him because I'd wanted to believe him, because admitting the truth would have meant acknowledging that I'd raised a son who valued appearance over substance, who thought success was something you could lease by the month. The credit cards had been the final straw, though I hadn't known it at the time. Nicholas had called me 6 months ago, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Dad, I need help. I made some mistakes with my finances, and I need about $20,000 to get back on track." $20,000. 2 months of my pension. Money that was supposed to fund my retirement, support me through my golden years, provide security in case of medical emergencies. What kind of mistakes, Nicholas? Just some credit card debt that got out of hand. You know how it is with interest rates and fees. It snowballed faster than I expected. I'd asked for details, but he'd been vague, evasive. Investment opportunities that hadn't panned out, unexpected expenses, bad advice from a financial advisor. Nothing that sounded quite real, but nothing I could definitively prove was a lie. Dad, I'm good for it. You know I'm good for it. This is just a temporary setback. Temporary setback. That's what he'd called $47,000 in credit card debt, spread across 8 different cards. Temporary setback was his term for a lifestyle that cost twice what he earned. I'd given him the $20,000, but something inside me had finally started asking the right questions. That's when I'd hired the private investigator. Marcus Webb, former police detective turned private investigator, had been recommended by a friend who'd used his services during a messy divorce. Marcus was thorough, discreet, and brutally honest about what he found. "Your son is living a fantasy," he'd told me during our first meeting. "He's got the apartment, the car, the clothes, the lifestyle of someone making 6 figures. Problem is, he's making about half that." Marcus had shown me photographs of Nicholas at expensive restaurants, designer shopping trips, weekend getaways to ski resorts, always with different women, always picking up the check, always maintaining the image of a successful young executive. "He's using credit cards like their income," Marcus had explained. "Minimum payments on maximum debt. It's a house of cards, and it's about to collapse." The financial records had been devastating. Not just the credit card debt, but personal loans, advances against his salary, money borrowed from friends with promises of quick repayment. Nicholas owed money to 17 different sources. "But here's the interesting part," Marcus had continued. "He's been talking to people about his inheritance expectations. Your house, your pension, your life insurance. He's basically been treating your assets as collateral for his current lifestyle." That's when Marcus had shown me the photographs from the elder law office. Nicholas meeting with attorneys who specialized in guardianship proceedings, documents about proving a parent's mental incapacity, pamphlets about financial protection for elderly family members. "He's not planning to wait for you to die," Marcus had said bluntly. "He's planning to have you declared incompetent so he can access your money while you're still alive." The conversation I'd overheard at Christmas had just been confirmation of what the investigation had already revealed. My son wasn't waiting for his inheritance. He was actively planning to take it. That's when I'd started making my own plans. The house sale had been easy. Real estate in our neighborhood was hot, and I'd gotten 3 offers above asking price within a week of listing. The offshore accounts had taken more research, but Sterling Financial had walked me through the process of legally protecting assets from potential domestic financial abuse. The pension modification had been the most complex part. Dr. Martinez had been skeptical at first when I'd explained my situation, but the evidence Marcus had gathered had convinced her that I was genuinely at risk. "Unfortunately, Mr. Anderson, what you're describing is becoming more common," she'd told me. "Adult children who view their parents' assets as their own inheritance, who become impatient waiting for natural inheritance timelines." The psychological evaluation had been thorough. 3 sessions of interviews, cognitive testing, financial competency assessments. Dr. Martinez had concluded that while I was mentally competent, I was at significant risk of financial exploitation due to family pressure and emotional manipulation. "The temporary pension suspension is a protective measure," she'd explained. "It removes the immediate financial target while allowing you time to establish alternative arrangements." Alternative arrangements. That's what she'd called my new life in Montana. Now as the plane touched down in Billings, I realized that everything that had happened in my kitchen 3 nights ago had been inevitable. Not because Nicholas was evil, but because I'd spent 29 years teaching him that my love could be measured in dollars, that his needs mattered more than my security, that family meant one person sacrificing everything so another person could have everything. I'd created the monster that had tried to devour me, but I'd also found the strength to stop feeding it. The rental car agency was efficient, and within an hour, I was driving through Montana countryside towards Cedar Ridge. Rolling hills, endless sky, mountains that made human problems seem small and temporary. This was where I'd learned to live without the weight of someone else's expectations. My phone rang as I drove through the small town that would be my new home. Nicholas again, probably. I'd blocked his number, but he was resourceful when he wanted something. I let it ring until it stopped. In my rearview mirror, I could see my old life disappearing mile by mile. The son who'd planned to steal my future. The house where I'd spent 30 years sacrificing for someone who saw me as a bank account. The pension I'd worked 43 years to earn, only to watch my own child try to take it away. Ahead of me was a small town where nobody knew my story, where I could build a life based on who I was rather than what I owned, where kindness would be measured in actions rather than transactions. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. 2 weeks into my new life in Cedar Ridge, the calls started coming to my new number. I don't know how Nicholas found it, but desperation has a way of making people resourceful. The first call came at 6 in the morning, Montana time. I was sitting on my new porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, drinking coffee from a mug I'd bought at the local hardware store. The peaceful morning shattered when my phone rang. "Dad, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days." Nicholas's voice was different now, thinner, strained, with an edge of panic that hadn't been there during our kitchen confrontation. "Good. Hello, Nicholas. Dad, we need to talk. I've been to lawyers, 3 different lawyers. They all say the same thing." I took another sip of coffee and watched a deer pick its way across my new backyard. And what do they say? They say what you did is legal. The house sale, the offshore accounts, the pension modification, all completely legal. "That's because it is legal, son. But Dad, they also said there might be ways to challenge it. Undue influence, financial abuse of the elderly, improper medical evaluation. We could fight this." We. Even now, when he was threatening to drag me through court, he was using language that suggested partnership. The manipulation was so deeply ingrained he probably didn't even realize he was doing it. "Nicholas, how much money do you have to fight this?" The silence stretched long enough to answer my question. "I'll find a way to pay for it. Contingency fees, legal aid, something." "With what?" "Your credit rating is shot. Your debt-to-income ratio makes you unemployable for any loan. And no lawyer takes elder abuse cases on contingency when the alleged victim is clearly competent and represented by better attorneys than you can afford." I heard him breathing heavily, probably pacing around his expensive apartment that he could no longer afford. "Dad, you don't understand. I'm in real trouble here. The credit card companies are calling every day. My car payment is 3 months behind. My landlord is starting eviction proceedings." Real trouble, I almost laughed. For 29 years, Nicholas had been my real trouble. Now he was finally his own real trouble. "That sounds like a you problem, Nicholas." "A me problem?" "Dad, I'm your son, your only child. When I'm in trouble, it's a family problem." Family problem. The language he'd used to justify every financial crisis, every emergency loan, every time he'd reached into my pocket to solve problems he'd created. "Nicholas, family problems are things like illness, natural disasters, unexpected medical bills. Family problems are not $47,000 in credit card debt from living beyond your means. You don't understand what it's like to be young in today's economy. Everything is expensive. Housing, cars, food, everything. You can't expect people my age to live like you did when you were starting out." I watched a hawk circle overhead, hunting for breakfast with patience and precision. No shortcuts, no borrowed tools, just the skills nature had given it, and the determination to use them. "Nicholas, when I was your age, I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for a house and support a pregnant wife. I didn't have designer clothes or expensive cars or fancy apartments. I had work boots and a lunch pail and the determination to build something. That was different. The economy was different then. You're right, it was different. It was harder. Houses cost more relative to income. Interest rates were higher, and nobody expected their parents to subsidize their lifestyle indefinitely." I could hear him moving around, probably looking at the apartment he was about to lose, the car he couldn't afford, the lifestyle that was about to collapse around him. "Dad, what if I promise to change? What if I get a financial counselor, cut up my credit cards, move to a cheaper place? What if I prove to you that I can be responsible?" "Nicholas, do you remember what you told me 3 weeks ago? You said I just needed a roof until the end. You weren't offering to help me be responsible with my money. You were planning to take it away completely. That was a mistake. I was angry. I was scared about my own situation, and I said things I didn't mean." "No, son. You said exactly what you meant. You meant that my financial independence was less important than your financial problems." The second call came that afternoon. This time, Nicholas had backup. "Mr. Anderson, this is Patricia Blackwood from Blackwood & Associates. I represent your son, Nicholas Anderson, in a potential elder abuse case. I was in my new garage, unpacking tools and setting up a workshop. The space was smaller than my old one, but it had better light and a view of the mountains. perfect for the furniture projects I'd been planning. Ms. Blackwood, I assume my son hired you on contingency, since he doesn't have money to pay legal fees. Mr. Anderson, I think there may be some misunderstanding about your son's financial situation and your recent asset transfers. No misunderstanding at all. My son has $47,000 in credit card debt, owes money to 17 different creditors, and has been living beyond his means for years using my money to bridge the gap. Sir, that's not... How did you... I hired a private investigator, Ms. Blackwood. I have detailed financial records, photographs, recorded conversations, and documented evidence of my son's plans to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could access my pension. The silence on the other end told me she hadn't expected that level of preparation. Mr. Anderson, even so, the rapid liquidation of assets and offshore transfers could be seen as evidence of impaired judgment or undue influence from outside parties. Ms. Blackwood, the asset transfers were handled by Sterling Financial, one of the most reputable international banking firms in the country. The house sale went through Morrison & Associates, who have handled real estate transactions in my former neighborhood for 20 years. The pension modification was approved by Dr. Martinez after extensive psychological evaluation. But sir, surely you can understand your son's concern about such dramatic financial changes. I set down the saw I'd been unpacking and walked to the garage window. In the distance, a farmer was working his field, preparing soil for spring planting. Honest work, productive work, work that built something instead of tearing it down. Ms. Blackwood, my son's only concern is that he can no longer access my money to pay for his lifestyle. If he were concerned about my well-being, he wouldn't have planned to have me declared incompetent. Mr. Anderson, we have reason to believe that may have been a misunderstanding. We have recordings. Another silence. Recordings of what? Conversations between my son and elder law attorneys discussing guardianship procedures, conversations with his friends about his inheritance expectations, conversations with financial advisors about managing assets for an elderly family member with diminished capacity. I heard papers rustling, probably Ms. Blackwood reviewing whatever Nicholas had told her about the situation. Mr. Anderson, perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss this situation more thoroughly. Ms. Blackwood, let me save you some time. My son hired you because he thought his old man was an easy target who could be intimidated by legal threats. What he didn't tell you is that his old man spent 6 months preparing for this exact conversation. Sir, I think you may be overreacting to... Ms. Blackwood, how much is your retainer? I'm sorry? Your retainer. How much money did my son pay you to take this case? The silence stretched long enough to answer my question. Ms. Blackwood, my son doesn't have money for a retainer because he spent the last 10 years spending money he didn't have on a lifestyle he couldn't afford. He's hoping you'll work for free based on a settlement he's never going to see. Mr. Anderson, that's between my client and myself. Of course it is, but when you don't get paid, remember this conversation. I hung up and went back to organizing my tools. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Dad, what did you say to my lawyer? Nicholas sounded frantic now, beyond panic and well into desperation. I told her the truth, son, something you apparently forgot to do. She fired me. She said the case wasn't viable and she couldn't represent me on contingency. Smart lawyer. Dad, this isn't funny. I'm losing everything, my apartment, my car, everything. I found my level and checked it against my new workbench. Perfectly straight, just like my life was becoming. Nicholas, you're not losing everything. You're losing access to my everything. There's a difference. But where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? What every other 29-year-old does when they can't afford their lifestyle. You adjust your lifestyle. I can't just start over. I have a reputation. I have professional relationships. I can't just disappear. Professional relationships. A reputation. He was more concerned about his image than his actual life. Nicholas, your reputation is built on money you don't have. Your professional relationships are based on a lifestyle you can't afford. Maybe it's time to build something real. You don't understand. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You get a job, any job. You move to a place you can afford. You pay off your debts $1 at a time. You build a life based on what you earn instead of what you can borrow. But I'll lose everything. You'll lose everything fake and have a chance to build something real. The third call came a week later. This time Nicholas wasn't alone. Dad, I'm here with Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to ask you some questions about recent financial transactions. I was sitting in my new living room reading a book about furniture making. Through the window, I could see my neighbor fixing his fence. Productive work, honest work, work that made things better instead of tearing them down. Detective Morrison, I assume my son filed a complaint about elder financial abuse. Yes, sir. He's concerned about some recent changes to your financial situation. Detective Morrison, have you reviewed the documentation I sent to your department last week? Documentation? I heard muffled conversation in the background, probably Nicholas realizing he'd walked into another trap. Detective Morrison, I sent a complete file to your department documenting my son's financial situation, his plans to access my pension through guardianship proceedings, and the preventive measures I took to protect my assets. Sir, we didn't receive any documentation. Then you should check with your mailroom. I sent copies of financial records, private investigator reports, recorded conversations, and medical evaluations. To everything that proves this complaint is an attempt to access money through false allegations. More muffled conversation. Mr. Anderson, can you hold while I check our files? Of course. 5 minutes later, Detective Morrison returned to the phone. Mr. Anderson, we found your package. After reviewing this material, I don't think we'll need to pursue this matter further. Dad? Nicholas's voice was small, defeated. Dad, are you there? I'm here, Nicholas. Why did you send them all that information? Because I knew you'd try this. Because I knew that when legal intimidation failed, you'd try to use law enforcement to pressure me into giving you access to my money. Dad, I wasn't trying to. I just thought. You thought your old man was stupid enough to steal his own money and leave evidence lying around for investigators to find. The line went quiet, except for the sound of Nicholas breathing. Detective Morrison, I said, thank you for your time. If my son files any additional complaints, you'll find the documentation package addresses those as well. Yes, sir. Mr. Anderson, your son, you might want to consider getting some financial counseling instead of pursuing legal remedies. After they hung up, I sat in my quiet living room and realized something had changed. For the first time in 29 years, I wasn't worried about Nicholas's next crisis, his next emergency, his next demand for money. He'd played every card he had. Legal threats, emotional manipulation, false accusations, and none of them had worked because I'd been smarter, more prepared, and more determined than he'd given me credit for. Outside, the mountains were turning purple in the evening light. Tomorrow I'd start building a bookshelf for my new home. Real work, creating something useful with my own hands. For the first time in years, I felt like my life belonged to me again. 6 months later, I was finishing a rocking chair for Mrs. Henderson when the letter arrived. The return address made my hands still on the sandpaper I'd been using to smooth the wooden armrest. Nicholas Anderson, followed by an address I didn't recognize. Not his expensive downtown apartment, but something in a part of town I'd driven through once and tried to forget. I set the letter aside and continued working. The chair was a commission piece, my first paying project since moving to Cedar Ridge. Mrs. Henderson had lost her husband last winter and wanted something special for her front porch, something that would help her feel connected to the home they'd shared for 40 years. Working with my hands again had been a revelation, not the frantic weekend projects I'd squeezed in between supporting Nicholas's lifestyle, but real craftsmanship, taking time to do things right. Every joint precisely cut, every surface perfectly smooth, every detail planned and executed with care. The letter sat on my workbench all afternoon, but I didn't open it. Whatever Nicholas had to say could wait until I finished Mrs. Henderson's chair. By evening, the piece was complete. I'd made it from cherry wood with gentle curves that invited rest and contemplation, the kind of furniture that would last generations, that would carry memories long after its maker was gone. Only then did I open the letter. Dad, I'm writing this from my new apartment. It's not much, 1 bedroom, no dishwasher, carpet that's seen better days. But it's mine, paid for with money I earned. I got a job 3 months ago. Night shift at a call center, handling customer service for an insurance company. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. I'm also working weekends at a moving company, loading trucks and carrying furniture. You probably think I'm writing to ask for money. I'm not. I'm writing to tell you something I should have said years ago. You were right. About everything, about my spending, about my attitude, about the way I treated you, about the fact that I thought your money was mine, that your retirement was my inheritance, that your security was less important than my lifestyle. I lost the apartment. I lost the car. I lost most of my friends when they realized I couldn't pick up restaurant checks anymore. I lost the respect of people who I thought cared about me, but really just cared about what I could afford to spend on them. But I didn't lose my life, and I'm starting to build something real. I'm paying off my debts slowly. $50 a month to each credit card company. It'll take years, but I'm making progress. I cut up all the cards except one for emergencies, and I've learned what an actual emergency looks like. My landlord is teaching me basic carpentry in exchange for maintenance work around the building. Turns out I have some talent for working with my hands. Wonder where that came from. I'm not writing to apologize, because I know words don't fix what I did. I'm writing to let you know that the lesson you taught me is taking hold. It's hard. Learning to live within my means. Learning to work for what I want. Learning to respect money instead of just spending it. But it's also good. For the first time in my life, everything I have belongs to me because I earned it. My small apartment, my used furniture, my beat-up Honda that I bought with cash. It's not much, but it's mine. I drove by your old house last month. The new owners have painted it blue and planted roses where Mum's daffodils used to grow. It looks happy. Different, but happy. I hope you're happy too, wherever you are. Nicholas P.S. I'm enclosing a check for $500. It's partial repayment for the emergency fund you left me. I know it's not much, but it's what I can afford right now. I'll send more as I'm able. I read the letter twice before looking at the check. $500, drawn on a checking account from a bank I'd never heard of. The memo line said, debt repayment. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the mountains. The sunset was painting them red and gold, another day ending in the peaceful rhythm that had become my new normal. Nicholas was learning. Late, painfully, expensively, but he was learning. The lessons I should have taught him 20 years ago were finally taking hold, forced by necessity and hardship instead of guided by love and wisdom. But maybe that was how some people had to learn. Maybe some lessons could only be taught by life itself, through consequences and struggle, and the slow realization that no one else was going to fix your problems for you. I thought about Sarah, wondered what she would have made of all this. She'd always been softer with Nicholas than I was, quicker to excuse his mistakes and provide solutions to his problems. But she'd also been the one who insisted we teach him the value of work, the importance of earning what you wanted. She would have been proud of the night shift job, the weekend work, the slow progress toward financial responsibility. She would have seen the man he was becoming instead of mourning the boy he'd been. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer, but I didn't cash the check. Instead, I started a separate savings account. Every payment Nicholas sent would go there, accumulating until it represented something significant. When he'd proved to himself that he could build a life through his own efforts, I'd give it all back to him as a foundation for whatever came next. Not as a rescue, but as a reward for rescuing himself. The rocking chair was delivered the next morning. Mrs. Henderson cried when she saw it, running her fingers over the smooth wood and settling into it like she was embracing an old friend. "It's perfect," she said, rocking gently on her front porch. "Tom would have loved it." She paid me more than we'd agreed on, insisting that craftsmanship like this was worth the extra cost. The money went into my new account at the local bank, alongside the retirement funds that were growing again, now that I wasn't subsidizing anyone else's lifestyle. Word spread about the rocking chair. Cedar Ridge was a small town where good work and fair dealing were noticed and remembered. Within a month, I had 3 more commissions and a waiting list of customers who wanted custom furniture made with care instead of mass-produced in a factory. I hired Tommy Martinez, a 19-year-old kid whose father worked at the local feed store. Tommy was eager to learn, quick with his hands, and reminded me of myself at that age. Hungry for knowledge, grateful for opportunity, willing to work hard for the chance to build something meaningful. Teaching him felt like redemption. All the patience I'd never shown Nicholas, all the wisdom I'd never shared because I'd been too busy writing checks, all the satisfaction of watching someone grow through effort instead of entitlement. Tommy earned his pay. Every dollar was linked to work completed, skills mastered, problems solved. He learned that quality took time, that shortcuts led to failure, that the best reward for good work was the opportunity to do better work. The lessons I'd failed to teach my own son, I passed on to this young man who appreciated them. My phone rang less frequently now. Nicholas called once a month, usually on Sundays, to update me on his progress. The conversations were different now. No requests for money, no manipulation, no attempts to make his problems into family emergencies. Instead, he told me about learning to cook, about fixing his own car, about the satisfaction of paying off one credit card completely. Small victories in a long campaign to rebuild his life on a foundation of earned success instead of borrowed prosperity. "Dad," he'd said during our last conversation, "I understand now why you did what you did." "Do you? You weren't punishing me. You were teaching me. It just took me this long to learn the lesson." The mountains outside my window were covered with snow now, winter settling over Cedar Ridge like a comfortable blanket. I had contracts for 6 pieces of furniture to be completed by spring, orders from people who appreciated handmade quality and were willing to pay for it. My workshop was warm and well lit, filled with the smell of wood shavings and the satisfaction of productive work. No pressure, no deadlines imposed by other people's crises, no guilt about money that should have been spent on someone else's problems. For the first time in 30 years, my life belonged entirely to me. I'd built something here in Montana, not just a business, but a community of people who valued honesty, craftsmanship, and the simple dignity of earning what you had. Mrs. Henderson brought me vegetables from her garden. Tommy's father fixed my truck without being asked. The banker who'd helped me set up my accounts invited me to dinner with his family. Relationships based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. Friendship that wasn't contingent on what I could afford to give. This was what Nicholas had cost me for 29 years. Not just money, but the peace of mind that came from living within your means, contributing to your community, building something lasting through your own efforts. The snow was falling harder now, big, soft flakes that would blanket the valley by morning. I added wood to the stove and settled into my own chair, a simple piece I'd made for myself from pine and dedication. On my desk, I kept the picture Sarah had taken of Nicholas learning to ride his bicycle. 7 years old, determined and fearless, pumping his legs as hard as he could while I held the back of his seat. In the photo, you can see the moment I let go, the moment he realized he was riding on his own. I'd thought that moment taught him about independence, about the confidence that comes from mastering something through effort and practice. But somehow over the years, he'd forgotten that lesson and learned instead that someone would always be there to hold him up. Now finally, he was learning to ride again, learning that balance comes from within, that forward motion requires your own effort, that the best victories are the ones you achieve without anyone else's help. It had taken me 55 years to learn that the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to rescue them from the consequences of their choices. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and patient, teaching their own lessons about endurance, about beauty that couldn't be bought or borrowed or stolen. I had work to do tomorrow. A dining table for the Peterson family, made from oak that would outlast all of us. Honest work paid for honestly, creating something that would serve a family for generations. The phone was silent. My account balance was growing. My hands were calloused from meaningful work. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely, perfectly free.